Japanese planners at Cape Gloucester believed the jungle itself was their strongest weapon. Engineering assessments assumed swollen rivers, sucking mud, and relentless rain would halt any rapid American advance, especially vehicles and artillery, according to operational records. December 1943 rainfall turned New Britain's interior into knee-deep mire, with dense rainforest reducing visibility to yards and collapsing primitive trails under constant traffic. Japanese doctrine emphasized terrain denial, trusting nature to succeed where firepower could fail. What unfolded shocked those assumptions. Under intermittent fire and brutal weather, American combat engineers began constructing a functional bridge across a river Japanese planners considered impassable. Working in rotating shifts, often waist-deep in water, they cut timber, assembled supports, and stabilized approaches despite flooding and enemy pressure. Engineering logs document a stunning result. Within roughly 72 hours, the crossing supported men, equipment, and momentum. What had been a defensive barrier became a highway. Meteorological summaries recorded heavy rainfall, oppressive humidity, and churned mud that swallowed boots and tools alike. Yet American engineering doctrine valued speed, improvisation, and relentless execution. Where Japanese planners saw fixed obstacles, American engineers saw solvable problems. Terrain meant delay, not defeat. The contrast was decisive. Japanese confidence rested on static defenses and environmental limits. American confidence rested on adaptability, manpower, and the willingness to build under fire. The river that promised safety instead exposed vulnerability. Commanders on the ground understood that every hour mattered, because delays risked casualties, stalled operations, and allowed Japanese forces time to recover, reposition, and reinforce defenses once believed secure by intelligence estimates and subsequent battlefield reports from multiple units, aqueducts, and headquarters. How did American engineers erase a Japanese defensive advantage in just 3 days? To understand why this outcome stunned Japanese planners, U.S. military records show we must first examine the confidence behind Japan's defensive strategy. Japanese defensive planning in the Southwest Pacific was rooted in confidence that terrain could replace firepower. Imperial Army engineers studied New Britain's interior rivers, mangrove swamps, and rain-soaked jungle, and judged them natural fortifications. According to captured planning documents and post-war analyses, Japanese doctrine emphasized terrain denial, delay the enemy, exhaust him, and let disease, mud, and logistics do the killing. At Cape Gloucester, this confidence had precedent. Japanese forces had repeatedly used jungle rivers to stall Allied advances in New Guinea, where flooding and poor roads immobilized vehicles and artillery. Intelligence summaries from late 1943 recorded Japanese expectations that American units would be forced to rely on slow foot movement, limiting offensive momentum. Defensive positions were sited accordingly, with fire lanes covering likely crossing points, while interior rivers were left largely unguarded, considered impassable in combat conditions. Japanese communications reflected this assurance. Ports emphasized weather forecasts, noting constant rain and poor drainage that would deepen mud and swell waterways. Engineer assessments assumed bridge construction under fire was unrealistic given time, materials, and exposure. Instead, Japanese planners focused resources on beach defenses and airfield denial, confident that inland obstacles would buy critical weeks. This doctrine rested on a static view of warfare. Japanese engineering philosophy prioritized fixed defenses and natural barriers over rapid countermeasures. Rivers were weapons, not problems to solve. That belief shaped dispositions, supply planning, and reaction timelines. When American forces reached the interior, Japanese commanders expected delay, fatigue, and confusion, not speed. That expectation created a dangerous blind spot. While Japanese headquarters trusted geography to slow the advance, American planning moved on a different axis entirely. As Japanese officers recorded confidence in nature's protection, U.S. military archives reveal engineers preparing to turn terrain itself into an asset, not a shield. This confidence also shaped intelligence priorities. Japanese staff underestimated American logistics capacity and discounted engineer units as secondary forces rather than decisive enablers. Supply calculations assumed river crossings would take weeks, not days, allowing reserves time to maneuver. That assumption influenced command tempo and delayed contingency planning. When reports finally indicated unexpected construction activity, response options were limited. The doctrine that trusted terrain over adaptability left little margin for surprise. And at Cape Gloucester, surprise arrived measured not in months, but in hours. Japanese commanders would soon learn that engineering speed could dismantle confidence built on geography alone and reshape the tempo of the entire campaign itself. American forces approaching Cape Gloucester faced conditions that made even friendly planners uneasy. Official strength reports showed limited engineer detachments, scarce heavy equipment, and supply lines stretched across hostile seas. Rainfall flooded beaches, roads dissolved into mud, and disease rates climbed steadily. Allied correspondents noted doubts about how quickly inland movement could occur once troops left the coast. Logistical records highlighted the imbalance. Japanese defenders had interior positions prepared, while American units lacked established roads, bridging materials, and secure depots. Engineering officers warned that rivers, swollen by constant rain, could halt armor and artillery entirely. Meteorological summaries confirmed relentless storms, low visibility, and jungle growth so dense that progress slowed to yards per hour. The terrain favored the defender, and intelligence estimates reflected that reality. Skepticism extended beyond the battlefield. Some Allied planners believed Cape Gloucester would become another slow, grinding fight defined by attrition rather than maneuver. Supply officers worried that delays would increase casualties, strain medical resources, and expose beachheads to counterattack. Every day lost inland meant Japanese forces retained freedom to reposition and reinforce. Yet beneath this documented disadvantage lay hidden potential. American engineering doctrine emphasized flexibility, decentralized decision-making, and rapid problem-solving under pressure. Engineer units trained to improvise with local materials, work continuously, and accept risk to preserve momentum. After-action reports from earlier Pacific operations showed that speed often compensated for shortages. Where numbers and equipment were lacking, organization and determination could close the gap. The underdog reality was clear in official files. Outnumbered in specialized equipment, constrained by weather, and doubted by allies. American forces still faced a simple choice: pause and accept delay, or act decisively and force the campaign forward. The stakes were immediate. Airfields, operational tempo, and strategic initiative depended on crossing obstacles the enemy believed unbeatable. That pressure would soon test whether American adaptability could overcome every documented disadvantage stacked against them. Engineering memoranda emphasized that failure would freeze the campaign, while success could shock the enemy, collapse defensive assumptions, and transform a marginal landing into a decisive operational breakthrough with lasting consequences across the wider New Britain campaign. Behind the front lines at Cape Gloucester, American engineers were preparing an approach that Japanese intelligence never detected. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doctrine in the Pacific emphasized speed, improvisation, and relentless execution under combat conditions. Rather than building permanent structures, engineers were trained to create crossings that were good enough, fast enough to sustain momentum. Official planning documents stressed that time, not elegance, decided campaigns in jungle warfare. Declassified records show engineer officers studying river width, current speed, and soil stability almost immediately after landing. Instead of waiting for prefabricated components, they planned to exploit local timber, modular equipment, and manpower organized into rotating shifts. Engineering memoranda emphasized continuous work cycles, even under fire, to compress timelines the enemy believed impossible. The goal was not durability for years, but functionality for hours that would change the operational balance. American industrial capacity shaped this mindset. Training manuals and after-action reports reveal a confidence in standardization and adaptability. Engineers understood load limits, vehicle weights, and stress tolerances well enough to improvise safely. Technical tables from engineer field manuals guided rapid calculations, allowing officers to authorize construction decisions on the spot without lengthy approvals. This decentralized authority proved critical in jungle conditions where delays invited failure. Intelligence summaries also played a role. American planners recognized that Japanese doctrine underestimated Allied engineering capabilities. Captured documents from earlier campaigns showed Japanese reliance on terrain denial and slow reaction timelines. Engineers were briefed that surprise would come not from firepower but from speed. Saved reduced Japanese options and compressed their response window. Innovation extended beyond materials. Work discipline became a weapon. Engineering logs describe round-the-clock labor, coordinated security, and immediate repairs under fire. When flooding undermined supports, adjustments were made rather than halting work. When mud swallowed equipment, timber reinforcement followed. Each obstacle generated a solution rather than a pause. Commanders on the ground encouraged initiative, trusting engineered judgment over rigid adherence to pre-war assumptions. This philosophy contrasted sharply with Japanese expectations. Where Japanese planners saw rivers as fixed barriers, American engineers viewed them as engineering problems governed by physics, not fear. Terrain was analyzed, measured, and exploited. Risk was accepted deliberately, balanced against operational necessity. The bridge plan at Cape Gloucester reflected this approach. Rapid assembly, calculated load limits, and immediate use once minimum standards were met. As construction preparations advanced, Japanese patrol reports and intelligence summaries showed no awareness of the scale or speed of what was unfolding. American engineers were about to demonstrate that doctrine, training, and adaptability could neutralize geography itself. When construction began, the true shock was not that a bridge appeared, but that it appeared before Japanese commanders believed it was even possible. American units began moving toward the river obstacle as engineering preparations quietly shifted into action. Movement logs from early January 1944 show infantry advancing through mud-choked jungle while engineers reconnoitered crossing points under cover of rain and low visibility. The river itself was swollen, its banks unstable, current accelerated by days of sustained rainfall, recorded in meteorological summaries. Japanese planners believed these conditions guaranteed delay. Timelines reconstructed from unit diaries revealed deliberate positioning. Security elements screened the approaches while engineer teams stockpiled tools, rope, and timber near the water's edge. Supply parties hauled materials forward by hand since vehicles could not reach the site. Each movement was logged against the clock. Commanders understood that speed mattered more than concealment once work began. Weather reports described oppressive humidity, intermittent downpours, and ground that collapsed under weight. Mud depth measurements and engineer notes recorded boots sinking to the calf, sometimes deeper. These conditions reinforced Japanese confidence. Intelligence assessments assumed any attempt at bridging would require extended preparation, giving defenders time to react once activity was detected. Intercepted Japanese communications during this period reflected continued assurance. Reports emphasized the river as a natural stop line and focused attention on coastal areas instead. Patrol activity inland remained limited, consistent with the belief that terrain alone would delay the enemy. This complacency reduced observation and delayed response planning at critical moments. As American units reached staging positions, coordination intensified. Infantry units prepared to secure both banks once construction started. Engineers finalized load calculations, adjusting for water flow and soil weakness. According to engineering logs, last-minute decisions were made on site based on observation rather than doctrine. The environment dictated solutions. The tension built toward a fixed moment. Timetables showed that once the order was given, there would be no pause. Every hour of delay increased risk, while every hour gained compressed Japanese reaction time. The setup phase ended not with artillery fire, but with quiet readiness. According to official logs, when construction began, it did so against a backdrop of rain, mud, and enemy confidence that nothing significant could happen there at all. Field commanders monitored watches and maps, knowing surprise depended on discipline and silence, not firepower, and that once tools struck earth and timber Japanese, certainty would begin to collapse, measured not in theory, but in minutes, stolen from an enemy convinced delay was inevitable under such unforgiving combat conditions and extreme pressure. According to U.S. Army engineering logs, construction began under conditions that confirmed every Japanese assumption about delay. The river ran high and fast, banks collapsed under weight, and steady rain reduced visibility while turning the ground into liquid mud. Yet instead of halting progress, these conditions triggered the very doctrine American engineers had trained for: Build immediately, adjust continuously, and never stop moving. Work proceeded in rotating shifts to maintain momentum. Engineer detachments entered the water to emplace supports, while others cut and shaped local timber along the banks. After-action reports describe men working waist-deep in current, stabilizing footings as rain swelled the river further. When flooding undermined early placements, teams reinforced them rather than restarting. Time logs show no prolonged pauses. Every setback produced an immediate modification. Security elements reported sporadic enemy fire, but Japanese response remained limited. Intelligence summaries later noted that Japanese commanders did not initially believe a bridge was being built, assuming the activity was reconnaissance or temporary work. This misinterpretation bought critical hours. Engineering officers used those hours aggressively. Load calculations were revised on site, accounting for vehicle weight, water pressure, and soil instability. Field manuals guided rapid decisions without higher approval, a hallmark of American engineering autonomy. As hours passed, progress accelerated. Support beams locked into place, decking followed, and approaches were reinforced with timber and packed earth to prevent vehicles from bogging down. Engineering records emphasized that the structure was not designed for permanence, but for immediate use. Strength thresholds were calculated precisely to support the required traffic, nothing more and nothing less. Speed governed every choice. Meteorological data confirms heavy rainfall throughout the operation, yet construction continued uninterrupted. Engineers rotated through exhaustion, with relief teams stepping in to sustain output. Unit diaries note improvised lighting, shouted commands over rain and river noise, and constant measurement checks to prevent failure under load. The bridge took shape faster than Japanese doctrine allowed planners to imagine. By approximately 72 hours after work began, the crossing was declared operational. Test loads were passed across under supervision, and movement orders followed immediately. Official reports record that infantry and equipment began crossing without delay, converting what had been a natural barrier into a conduit for advance. Japanese communications intercepted afterward reveal surprise at the speed of completion and confusion over how the crossing had been achieved so quickly. The decisive moment was not a single dramatic action, but the accumulation of disciplined hours. Engineering logs captured the significance plainly. An obstacle calculated to delay the campaign for weeks had fallen in days. In that narrow window, American engineers altered the tempo of the entire operation. The bridge did more than span a river, collapsed Japanese assumptions, accelerated American momentum, and proved that in jungle warfare, engineering speed could outweigh geography, weather, and enemy confidence combined into a single, irreversible operational shock. Japanese reaction to the completed crossing revealed how deeply their assumptions had failed. Intelligence summaries compiled after the operation show confusion spreading through Japanese command channels as reports confirmed American forces moving inland far sooner than anticipated. Communications intercepted in the days following the crossing indicate disbelief that a functional bridge could exist under such conditions, let alone have been built so quickly. Operational timelines collapsed almost immediately. Japanese defensive plans assumed days, even weeks, of delay at the river line. Instead, American units appeared beyond what had been considered a natural stop point. Captured documents and post-war interrogations describe hurried orders to reposition forces that arrived too late. Units tasked with interior defense were still dispersed or inadequately supplied, having relied on terrain rather than preparedness. Psychological impact compounded the material setback. Prisoner interrogation reports reveal that Japanese soldiers believed the river would protect their flanks and rear areas. When Americans crossed in strength, that belief shattered morale. Defensive positions hastily prepared for a slower advance were bypassed or rendered irrelevant. The speed of the crossing disrupted command cohesion and undermined confidence in higher headquarters. Casualty and movement reports illustrate the imbalance. Japanese units began retreating through the same jungle they had trusted as a barrier, now burdened by American pressure from unexpected directions. Advantages of concealment and terrain familiarity eroded once the enemy dictated tempo. Intelligence assessments note that Japanese commanders struggled to regain situational awareness, as assumptions underpinning their planning no longer applied. Strategic reassessment followed quickly. Japanese staff recognized that American engineering capability represented a systemic threat, not an isolated incident. Rivers, swamps, and jungle could no longer be assumed to guarantee delay. This realization forced defensive recalculations across the theater, diverting attention and resources under mounting Allied pressure. The collapse was not total destruction, but it was decisive disruption. A defense built on confidence in geography unraveled when geography failed. Official analyses concluded that the shock lay less in losses than in timing. American engineers had compressed weeks into days, stripping Japanese commanders of initiative. By the time countermeasures were considered, momentum was already lost. The river crossing at Cape Gloucester demonstrated a critical truth recorded repeatedly in post-campaign assessments. When assumptions fail, collapse follows quickly. Japanese confidence and terrain denial had shaped their planning, and when that foundation cracked, the structure above it faltered. The bridge did not merely enable movement. It triggered a cascading breakdown in enemy expectations, reaction time, and control that reshaped the fight inland and marked a turning point in the campaign's psychological balance. The immediate effects of the bridge construction were felt across the Cape Gloucester battlefield within hours. Operational reports confirmed that once the crossing became usable, American units accelerated inland movement far beyond projected timelines. Infantry, supplies, and supporting equipment flowed across the river, allowing commanders to exploit momentum before Japanese forces could reorganize. What had been calculated as a natural pause point instead became a launch platform. American after-action summaries emphasize how quickly tactical options expanded. Routes previously dismissed as inaccessible were suddenly viable. Units advanced toward key objectives with reduced concern for supply interruption, while engineers reinforced approaches to sustain traffic. Airfield construction schedules, closely tied to ground movement, advanced accordingly. Headquarters communications noted that engineering success directly translated into operational freedom. Japanese consequences were immediate and negative. Intelligence assessments described disrupted command coordination as defensive lines were outflanked earlier than expected. Positions oriented toward a delayed advance found themselves threatened from unexpected directions. Supply movements planned around extended timelines were overtaken by events. Reports indicate that Japanese commanders struggled to adjust priorities as American tempo exceeded planning assumptions. Allied command responses reflected recognition of a turning point. Messages from higher headquarters praised engineer performance and highlighted the crossing as an example of combat engineering altering operational outcomes. The success reinforced confidence in decentralized decision-making and rapid execution. Planning documents for subsequent operations referenced Cape Gloucester as proof that terrain obstacles could be neutralized faster than intelligence estimates suggested. Media and internal reporting also captured the impact. While much remained classified during the campaign, internal newsletters and morale reports emphasized ingenuity and determination. The bridge became a symbol of American adaptability under pressure, reinforcing confidence among troops facing similar conditions elsewhere in the Pacific. Strategically, the consequences extended beyond immediate gains. Japanese forces lost time they could not replace. American units seized initiative, dictating movement rather than reacting. Operational summaries conclude that the crossing shortened the campaign's inland phase and reduced cumulative risk by denying the enemy recovery time. The river no longer defines the battle's pace. By transforming a defensive barrier into an avenue of advance, American engineers reshaped the immediate operational environment. The bridge's impact was measured not only in distance gained, but in time stolen from the enemy. That time advantage cascaded through planning cycles, supply schedules, and command decisions, amplifying the effect of a single engineering success into a broader operational shift that influenced the remainder of the Cape Gloucester campaign and reinforced lessons already emerging across the Pacific theater. Military historians later identified the Cape Gloucester Bridge operation as a defining example of combat engineering. Strategic value. Academic analyses from post-war studies placed the event within a broader pattern emerging across the Pacific. American forces repeatedly neutralized Tyrant-based defenses through speed, innovation, and organizational flexibility. The operation illustrated how engineering capability could directly shape battlefield outcomes rather than merely support them. Official doctrinal reviews emphasize the lesson. Rivers, swamps, and jungle, long considered dominant defensive features, were reassessed in light of American performance. Engineer schools incorporated case studies from Cape Gloucester to demonstrate rapid decision-making, loud calculation under fire, and improvisation using limited resources. These lessons influenced training curricula well beyond World War II. The legacy also extended to operational planning. Subsequent campaigns reflected increased confidence in crossing obstacles quickly, reducing pauses that previously characterized jungle warfare. Planning timelines shortened, and assumptions about delay were recalibrated. Engineers were increasingly integrated into early planning phases, recognized as decisive enablers rather than auxiliary units. Historians also highlighted the psychological dimension. Japanese reliance on terrain denial reflected a broader doctrinal rigidity. American adaptability exposed the vulnerability of static assumptions in a dynamic conflict. The bridge symbolized a shift from reacting to environment to mastering it. This contrast became a recurring theme in military education, illustrating how mindset and doctrine could outweigh numerical or geographic advantages. Veteran accounts reinforced this interpretation. Memoirs from engineers and infantry alike describe pride in overcoming conditions believed insurmountable. These personal narratives, supported by official records, underscored the human element behind doctrinal success. Fatigue, risk, and improvisation translated abstract principles into lived experience, strengthening the credibility of post-war analyses. In the broader context of World War II, Cape Gloucester operation contributed to the erosion of Japanese defensive confidence across the theater. Each instance where terrain failed to deliver promised security forced Japanese planners to reconsider assumptions under mounting pressure. While no single event decided the war, cumulative lessons like this shaped outcomes. Military historians ultimately framed the bridge as more than a tactical achievement. It represented a convergence of doctrine, training, and industrial culture. American forces did not merely respond to obstacles. They anticipated and overcame them. The legacy of Cape Gloucester endured in engineering doctrine, operational art, and the enduring principle that adaptability, applied rapidly, could redefine what was considered possible in war. The bridge at Cape Gloucester stands as a powerful reminder that wars are not won by assumptions, but by action grounded in capability and resolve. Japanese planners trusted rivers, rain, and jungle to delay the American advance. Official records showed that confidence was misplaced. In just 72 hours, American engineers transformed a natural barrier into an avenue of attack, overturning weeks of defensive planning. The lesson documented in military education materials is clear. Engineering is not a supporting function confined to the rear. It is a decisive instrument that shapes tempo, opportunity, and outcome. At Cape Gloucester, speed mattered more than permanence, and adaptability mattered more than terrain. American engineers accepted risk, improvised under fire, and delivered results when delay threatened operational failure. This achievement fits within a broader tradition recorded throughout American military history. From Europe to the Pacific, engineers repeatedly solved problems the enemy believed unsolvable. Their work rarely dominated headlines, yet its impact was profound. Bridges, roads, airfields, and logistics networks determined where and when combat power could be applied. For modern audiences, the story carries enduring relevance. It challenges assumptions about what is possible under extreme conditions. It highlights how preparation, doctrine, and initiative can overcome disadvantages documented on paper. Most importantly, it honors the individuals whose labor under fire reshaped campaigns without seeking recognition. The Cape Gloucester Bridge was not built for glory. It was built because it had to be. The necessity produced innovation, discipline, and success. Military history proves that victory often belongs to those who act while others wait. If this story revealed a side of World War II you rarely hear about, explore more hidden engineering victories that shaped the conflict. These moments grounded in documented evidence remind us why adaptability and determination remain central to American military effectiveness.